I would like to paint as the bird sings. Impressionism, an innovative new style of art, was scorned and rejected by the traditional Parisian art salons, but it slowly spread throughout the world, inspiring new thoughts about culture, changing the way artists express themselves, and causing an impact in the academic and cultural world that still exists today. It began in Paris, France in 1862, when 4 young artists gathered in an art studio: Claude Monet, Pierre-Auguste Renoir, Alfred Sisley, and Frédéric Bézier, under the tutelage of the artist Charles Gleyre. Charles Gleyre had a style that was often described as hostile to reality. He was trapped in a bitter, dull world and quickly bored his students. They left the class, but they still continued to paint. The art styles of the time were Romanticism and Neoclassicism, the paintings of which had dark, somber colors and thick brushstrokes. The paintings consisted of scenes of religion, war, Greek and Roman gods, or portraits. The incentive to paint in this style was to please the most prestigious art exhibition at the time, the Salon de Paris. The Salon, held every 2 years, was one of the biggest social events in France.
If you wanted to be accepted as a painter in France, which was the center of the art world at that time, you had to show at the Salon, at the Academy. And if you weren't accepted there, then you really didn't have much of a hope of a career. The Impressionists, one of the things they changed also was capturing everyday scenes, everyday life, the common street scene, and that wasn't considered appropriate material for paintings at that time.
During this time, Paris was changing and growing. Emperor Napoleon III was transforming Paris into an Americanized city. They demolished over 27,000 houses to make way for 100,000 more modern houses, and destroyed old, narrow streets to make big tree-lined boulevards. These changes were the subject of several Impressionist paintings. This caused people to flock to Paris. The population doubled in only 20 years. The Impressionist artists formed their group in the second half of the 19th century. At this time, Paris was under the rule of Napoleon III and Marshal MacMahon, who had a strict conservative government that caused Paris and its art to be deeply political. However, there was nothing conservative about Impressionism. It stood out among other works of art and tried to display nature, man, and emotions all in their purest form. They wanted to change what artists were working for. Instead of painting for money and fame, they were painting for themselves, and this was not what was accepted. The first time they showed their innovation in Paris was in 1863, when one of the most important and popular Salon de Paris exhibitions took place. Over 2,700 paintings out of the 5,000 submitted were rejected, most of which were by Impressionist painters. The artists raised such a protest that Napoleon III determined there would be an art show for the artists who had been rejected from the Salon de Paris. Unfortunately, this show was not well received. Critics called it complete craziness and were quick to deem it one of the worst styles in the 19th century. The term Impressionism was actually created by art critics to mock Claude Monet's painting Impression Sunrise, which critics despised because of its light, easy brushstrokes and relaxed shapes and outlines. The young artists took on the name and labeled their innovative group the Impressionists. They had their first Impressionism showing in 1874. But, like most of the Impressionist attempts to become accepted in Paris, the show was unsuccessful. This was followed by several more unsuccessful attempts. Still, they continued painting, holding Impressionist shows, and submitting to the Salon, despite the reaction from French society. The year 1886 is considered the end of the Impressionists. This was the year of their last show. At about this time, Impressionism began to appear in big cities all over the Western world, such as Berlin, Chicago, and New York. Claude Monet was responsible for this. Artists had tried to submit paintings to the Louvre numerous times, and when Monet tried in 1886, his paintings were accepted for the first time. The paintings became quickly popular, their prices skyrocketing as Impressionism was finally accepted. Monet's fellow Impressionists, unfortunately, were not there to see this. By then, most of them had passed away. In 1892, shortly after Impressionism rose to fame, Claude Monet moved to a small house in Giverny, France. He began painting his water lilies, the world-renowned series of paintings of the water lily ponds and Japanese bridge behind his house. Young artists often visited him to learn the style, which inspired them to continue teaching Impressionism in America and Europe. Once he died, his beautiful portraits of his beloved water lilies were bought by art museums all over the world, including the Art Institute of Chicago in Illinois, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, and the Musée d'Orangerie in France. The water lilies paintings were the true end of Impressionism in Paris, but they were also the beginning of the impact. They were what the world fell in love with. The impact was exhibited with the creation of Neo-Impressionism, an art style based off of Impressionism. Paul Cézanne and Georges Seurat, two artists from France, began painting the same light, free tones, and easy brushstrokes as the Impressionists. Another Neo-Impressionist artist was Vincent van Gogh, who lived at the same time as the Impressionist. It is believed that around the 1860s, he came to France, where he first saw the Impressionist paintings. His art was noticeably close to that of the Impressionists. He later became known as one of the most important artists of the 19th century, and influenced painters such as Henri Matisse to start art styles like Fauvism and Cubism. At the Art Students League in New York City, Impressionism continued to spread when Frank Vincent Dumond went to a Parisian art school with his younger brother in the late 1800s and learned of Impressionism. He went back to America and taught Impressionism at the Art Students League, teaching artists such as Georgia O'Keeffe and Norman Rockwell. His influence caused American museums and private schools to purchase Impressionist paintings from dealers in France, so more innovative new styles were created based off of Impressionist technique. Not only did Impressionism affect the visual arts, it had its effect on music. The classical music of the French composer Claude Debussy is claimed to be closely related to the ideas Impressionism introduced. Debussy himself openly hated Impressionism and claimed he was not related to the style of painting at all, saying, "I am trying to do something different." Still, music and art historians have compared his compositions to the paintings of the Impressionists. In the field of photography, the Impressionists themselves tended to take photos of a scene so they could capture the light and make it easier to paint from the photo, and this caused several photographers to try to take their pictures in the Impressionist style. The German photographer Alfred Stieglitz in 1921 started the idea of Impressionist photography from his black and white pictures of rain and night scenes shot at odd angles, which, like Impressionism, have the same idea of capturing a moment. His most famous photograph was of the American Impressionist Georgia O'Keeffe. Today, Impressionism is still as impactful as it was in the late 1800s, but in a different way. Now, people love it. Paintings are displayed in museums and bought for millions of dollars. They are constantly recreated as birthday cards, postcards, stamps, and posters. It's taught as the work of the great masters at universities all over the world, where young art students learn the technique for their own artistic development. What made Impressionism an innovation was how they refused to quit, no matter who scorned them or who refused them. They impacted many mediums of artistic expression seen today: photography, painting, music, even television and movies. Impressionism showed us that if they kept running at the wall, eventually it would break and create the world they wanted to live in, where they were free to express themselves artistically. If they hadn't tried so hard, over and over, to change the artistic viewpoint and become as beloved as realism, romanticism, and neoclassicism, students of art wouldn't have flocked to France to learn the style. Schools and buildings and inventions might have never existed. Famous musicians, writers, and directors might have not had the courage to try what they did. Because of the Impressionist persistence, today's artistic world exists very differently than what it could have been.